Hello, everyone. My name is Jason.
And I would be Allison.
Welcome to Transportation Tragedies. On behalf of myself and my co-host, we're taking you into the dark today.
Hi, everyone.
So I want you to just imagine waking up in this really luxurious, warm bed. You are entirely convinced of your absolute safety,
Right.
only to find yourself, literally minutes later, plunging into the freezing, just violently churning black water of Lake Michigan.
It's terrifying to even think about.
It really is. And the most terrifying part of all of this, the collision that put you in that water was really only the beginning of a long psychological nightmare.
Yeah, we are looking at a moment in history today that truly, it tests the absolute limits of human endurance and also structural failure.
Exactly. So our mission for this deep dive is to basically reconstruct, step by step, the timeline of what became the deadliest Great Lakes disaster of its time. We are diving into the tragedy of the Lady Elgin. But, to truly understand how horrifying this night actually became, we need to ground you in the atmosphere of the departure first, because it sets up this incredibly jarring contrast with what happens just a few hours later.
It really does.
So the date is September 6th, 1860, and the setting is Chicago.
And that specific time and place is just vital to understand. 1860 is a year of, profound fracture in the United States.
Oh, absolutely.
Because Civil War is right on the horizon, the political tension is incredibly thick, and Chicago is just humming with this chaotic, vibrant energy.
Yeah, the streets are basically packed, right?
Exactly. The streets are completely packed with people swept up in the fervor of the upcoming presidential election.
Yeah, and the sources we have, they paint this really vivid picture of massive torchlight processions just illuminating the streets. You have brass bands marching through the crowds. Taverns and meeting halls are like packed to the doors, literally spilling out onto the sidewalks.
People are really fired up.
They are. They're listening to these intense political speeches echoing super late into the evening. I mean, it is loud, it is bright, and it is deeply alive.
And against that exact backdrop of celebration, you have nearly 400 people making their way toward the docks to board a ship.
Which is a huge number of people.
It is. And we should probably clarify what kind of ship this was because, they had absolutely no reason to fear the water that night.
Not at all.
They were boarding the Lady Elgin, which was a sidewheel steamer widely considered to be a floating palace.
A floating palace, yeah.
Yeah. And for those unfamiliar with the design, a sidewheel steamer essentially relies on two massive paddle wheels on either side of the hull to propel it through the water.
Right.
It was enormous, it was fast, and it held this sterling reputation as literally one of the safest passenger vessels operating on the Great Lakes. Families boarded without a second thought.
And the mood on the decks totally reflected that complete confidence. There was laughter and music following the passengers right up the gangplank.
Oh, yeah.
A really large group aboard was actually Milwaukee's Irish Union Guard.
Right.
And they had spent the entire day celebrating, attending political rallies. And they brought all of that high-spirited energy with them onto the ship. They were still singing songs as they settled in.
Just a total party atmosphere.
Exactly. People were standing by the railings, just watching the glowing lights of Chicago. When you read through the first-hand accounts of this, the departure feels exactly like leaving a super loud, vibrant, chaotic festival and slowly walking out the doors into a dark, completely quiet room.
That's a perfect way to put it. The contrast is just incredibly sharp. You have this insulated bubble of light and safety pushing off the dock, leaving the harbor, and venturing out into this vast open expanse of Lake Michigan.
But that joy, that whole party atmosphere, it naturally starts to shift into this creeping dread.
Right.
Because as the Lady Elgin leaves the lights of Chicago behind, it is heading directly into a rising storm.
And it wasn't some sudden violent squall either.
No.
It was a storm that really built methodically out on the water. After midnight, the atmospheric conditions on Lake Michigan fundamentally shifted.
Yeah.
It began with steady, cold, relentless rain. And then the wind arrived, and that just changed the surface of the lake entirely.
And built so gradually that the people who were celebrating, they barely even noticed at first.
Right, they were distracted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then it gathered serious force. Waves began striking the hull of this floating palace with these heavy rhythmic thuds. The cabin windows actually started rattling.
Wow.
Yeah, and freezing spray swept right across the open upper decks, which basically drove the last of the revelers inside to find warmth.
And below deck, most passengers simply slept right through this initial building of the storm. They trusted the massive wooden hull around them.
Right, they thought they were totally safe.
Exactly. But up above, the crew is growing really uneasy. The shallow depth of Lake Michigan means that storms generate these short, steep waves that are just particularly brutal on large
Oh,
ships.
absolutely. And the weather wasn't even their only problem.
Right.
Because somewhere ahead of them, in the pitch-black darkness, another vessel was moving directly toward them.
This is where it gets really terrifying.
It does. At 2:30 in the morning, visibility collapses completely. The fog is hanging super thick over the churning lake, the rain is just blurring the horizon, and the wind is actively pushing both vessels closer together without either crew really grasping the catastrophic danger.
And you have to remember the total absence of modern navigation tools here.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there is no radar. They are relying purely on human eyesight in a blinding storm.
Which is almost nothing.
Exactly. And then, peering through the rain, someone on the Lady Elgin spots a shape. It's this massive, dark mass cutting through the fog, heading straight for their side.
And that mass is the Augusta.
Right.
The Augusta is a schooner, meaning it's a heavy timber vessel that is completely reliant on massive sails and wind power.
Which is a huge problem.
A huge problem, because that makes it very difficult to stop or maneuver quickly in a gale. So the moment that dark mass is spotted, shouts just erupt. Orders are screamed across the deck of the Lady Elgin.
But it's too late.
It's too late. Momentum dictates the outcome here. There is literally no time to turn. So the front of the Augusta punches broadside into the Lady Elgin.
And the specific location of that impact is just absolutely critical.
Yes, it is. The heavy wooden front of the Augusta punches deep into the hull, completely below the waterline.
And let's break down the mechanics of why a strike below the waterline is an immediate death sentence for a ship of this era.
Please do.
So if a ship is struck above the water or even right at the surface line, a competent crew actually has options.
Right.
They can shift heavy cargo to the opposite side to purposely tilt or, list the ship, which raises the damaged hull out of the water.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and they can fashion temporary patches. But when the hull is breached below the waterline, the physical dynamics of the lake turn against you in an instant.
Because of the massive water pressure?
Exactly.
To use a bit of an analogy here, a hole above the waterline is kind of like a leaky garden hose. It's annoying, but it's manageable.
Right.
A hole below the waterline is like trying to stop a fully open fire hydrant with your bare hands.
That captures the physics perfectly. I mean, the hydrostatic pressure of Lake Michigan pushes water into the ship with this explosive force. There is no slow trickling.
Yeah.
The lake just surges in, immediately destroying the ship's buoyancy from the bottom up. By the time the crew even registers the sound of splintering wood and shredding iron, thousands of gallons of water are already inside.
And the immediate aftermath below deck is just total, unadulterated panic. Passengers are literally thrown from their beds by the sheer force of the impact.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, cabin doors burst open from the shifting weight, and the oil lamps, which were the only source of light down there, they shatter against the floor, plunging the lower decks into complete darkness.
Oh, wow.
So you have freezing lake water rushing through the corridors at terrifying speed, and people are blindly trying to find their way out.
Yeah. And that confusion quickly morphs into realization, and that realization triggers just sheer panic.
Right.
Barefoot passengers, wearing nothing but thin nightclothes, flood up onto the upper decks. And remember the conditions they are running into.
The storm.
Yes. The rain is hammering them, the wind is howling, and these huge waves are actively breaking over the rails.
Meanwhile, the crew is desperately trying to fight the physics we just described. They attempt to plug this massive hole with literally whatever they can find.
Mattresses, right?
Yeah, mattresses, bedding, torn clothing, the pumps are manned. But the water's just rising way too fast. Families are screaming out names into the storm, trying to find each other in the dark.
It's chaos.
Total chaos. And it is at this exact moment that Captain Jack Wilson makes a highly debated decision.
Right, the engines.
Exactly. He orders the engines to keep running, attempting to drive the sinking ship toward the distant shore. And I want to stop right here because I really have to push back on this decision.
Okay, go ahead.
Driving a ship with a massive hole below the waterline forward, that basically goes against basic logic.
How so?
Well,
Yeah.
you are essentially turning the hull into a giant scoop. The forward momentum would force water into the ship exponentially faster than if they had just stayed completely still.
Well, you are entirely right about the physics of the water pressure. I mean, moving forward absolutely accelerated the flooding.
Right.
But look at the alternative facing the captain in that moment. If he shuts the engines down, the ship is dead in the water and sinks in the middle of a violently churning lake with zero chance of anyone making it to land.
That's fair.
By keeping the engines running, he was calculating a really desperate probability. He knew the ship was doomed, but he was hoping to run it aground in the shallows where people might actually stand a chance.
It is just a terrifying equation to calculate while hundreds of people are screaming behind you.
It really is.
But that forward momentum really sealed the ship's fate structurally. The damage caused by the front of the Augusta was just too severe. A sidewheel steamer is essentially a long, rigid wooden box. So when the middle fills with thousands of pounds of water, the weight distribution goes totally haywire.
Exactly.
When you force that compromised waterlogged structure forward through violent waves, the torque is just unimaginable. The wood cannot bend, so it begins to snap.
And within 20 minutes of the collision, witnesses actually described hearing a deep, unnatural groaning coming from the very bones of the ship.
Ugh, horrifying.
The decks shifted under the passengers' feet. The hull twisted.
And then it fails entirely. The Lady Elgin splits apart. Hundreds of people are thrown into the freezing lake all at once. It's just hard to wrap your head around going from a warm bed to...
Well, that's the thing. It's 20... Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, my apologies. You go ahead. I was just in disbelief at the timeline.
Yeah, no, the speed of the structural failure is what really shocks the mind here. In 20 minutes, a floating palace basically disintegrates.
Which brings us to a really profound realization found in the source material. As terrifying as the collision and the breaking of the ship were, they were not the true disaster.
Great.
The true disaster was the slow, agonizing, drawn-out hours in the water that followed.
The storm basically swallowed everything. Complete darkness, howling wind. But large sections of the wreckage actually remained afloat.
Right, like the deck pieces.
Yes, massive fragments of the deck, wooden beams, and pieces of the paddle housing. The paddle housing were these massive wooden boxes that covered the side wheels, and when the ship broke apart, they floated free like large rafts.
Okay, wow.
So the survivors who made it through that initial plunge fought their way onto literally anything that would hold their weight.
And they clung together in these tight groups, or they drifted completely alone. And the absolute darkness played a major psychological role here.
Oh, absolutely.
The only visual markers were provided by the storm itself. Lightning would strike, providing this brief, terrifying flash of illumination.
Like a strobe light.
Exactly. And in that fraction of a second, a survivor could see the absolute horror surrounding them. Broken pieces of the ship, faces bobbing in the swells, hands reaching out from the waves, and then the darkness would just swallow it all again.
The auditory experience was just as haunting, honestly. The night was filled with voices, people desperately screaming for their family members, praying out loud, begging the darkness for rescue.
Yeah.
But then, as the hours dragged on, those voices began to fade.
And this brings us to the physiological reality of the lake. The water of Lake Michigan in early September is dangerously cold, especially during a severe storm.
Extremely cold.
So how does hypothermia actually claim a person in this specific situation?
Well, it is a methodical shutting down of the body. When immersed in freezing water, the human body aggressively shuts warm blood away from the extremities and toward the vital organs in the core.
To protect the heart and brain.
Exactly, to keep the heart and brain alive. And as a direct result, the hands and feet go completely numb. Survivors physically lose the mechanical ability to group the wreckage. Yeah, their muscles fail, exhaustion takes over, and people simply slip silently beneath the surface.
There is one specific survivor account in the sources that I think just completely captures the absolute psychological terror of this long night.
Which one?
One survivor described clinging to a piece of wreckage in the pitch black. For hours, he held on to another person, actually gripping this other man's coat to keep him stable.
Okay.
He was drawing comfort from the fact that he was not facing the storm alone.
Right.
Only to realize, as the faint light of dawn finally broke, that the man beside him had been dead for hours.
Oh, man. That highlights the profound isolation of the event so well. You are surrounded by hundreds of people, yet you are fighting an entirely solitary battle against your own body's failing temperature and strength.
Exactly. And this horrific battle goes on all night. It isn't until near dawn that the storm finally drives the surviving wreckage toward the land.
Right.
Specifically, toward the shoreline near Evanston, Illinois. And the residents there wake up to something really strange. They do not hear thunder. They don't hear the crash of the waves.
What do they hear?
They hear screaming over the roaring of the wind.
Wow. And students from nearby Northwestern University actually ran from their dorms right down to the shoreline.
Yeah.
What they found waiting for them was just complete chaos. Bodies were rolling in the surf, massive pieces of timber were crashing into the shore.
And survivors, right?
Yes, there were survivors completely devoid of energy, still fighting for their lives just beyond the violent breakers. They were physically unable to make it those last few feet through the crushing waves to safety.
And this is where we encounter a figure whose physical endurance that morning is almost unfathomable. A body named Edward Spencer.
Right.
He's a university student. And when he saw people drowning mere yards from the sand, he took a rope, tied it securely around his waist, and ran directly into the violently churning lake.
And we have to remember, these waves were immense. They possessed enough kinetic energy to sweep his feet completely out from under him and violently push him backward.
Yeah.
But he forced his way forward into the freezing water. He reached one survivor, grabbed them, and the people on the shore used the rope to drag them both back to land.
And then he went back in.
Yeah.
He reached another survivor, dragged back. He did this again and again. He went back into the freezing, pounding surf 17 times.
17 times. It's unbelievable.
17 times he fought through the breakers to pull someone back from the edge. To understand the physiological toll of what he did, I mean, imagine the mechanics of exhaustion.
Right.
It is like running into a burning building, carrying the dead weight of another human being over and over again until your own lungs and muscles physically fail from lactic acid buildup and cold shock.
Exact.
By the end of his 17th rescue, he just collapsed.
And the tragedy of Edward Spencer is that his heroism permanently destroyed his health. The sheer physical trauma of that morning literally broke his body. He lived out the rest of his life largely confined to a wheelchair. He demanded everything his body had to give, and he basically did not stop until his physiology simply failed him.
It is a truly remarkable testament to human willpower. But it also really underscores the massive scale of the cleanup that followed.
Yeah, it does.
Because the bodies did not stop washing ashore. They came in all day. Then the next day, they were found tangled in the surf and half buried in the sand, literally spread out for miles along the coastline.
Just horrific.
Vegans were brought right down to the beaches to collect the dead.
And you had families walking among long rows of the deceased, desperately searching for their loved ones, and many people never even found them.
The lake kept them.
The lake kept them. Entire families were wiped out in a single night.
The impact on the local communities was devastating. Remember the Irish Union Guard from Milwaukee who had been seen on the decks?
Yeah, the ones having the party.
They were decimated. Funerals dominated the city of Milwaukee for weeks. Black mourning banners hung from buildings all across the city. The collective grief was just suffocating.
When the final toll was tallied, approximately 300 people had died. It was the deadliest disaster in Great Lakes history at the time.
300 people.
Yeah, but its legacy really extends far beyond the death toll. Disasters like the Lady Elgin forced severe changes in maritime regulations.
Oh, really?
Yes, the modern navigation rules we see today, like requiring specific lighting setups on vessels to indicate the direction of travel in the dark, those were born from the glaring failures of nights exactly like this one.
Now, that makes total sense.
So when you look out at the water today and see a ship's navigation lights cutting through the dark, you are looking directly at the legacy of the Lady Elgin.
But as we step back and kind of synthesize everything we've explored today, numbers and maritime laws do not capture the reality of what it meant to actually be there.
They really don't, because this was not a sudden explosion where everything went dark instantly. It was a prolonged, methodical wearing down of human endurance. It was a night spent shivering on a piece of broken wood, listening to the voices of the people you celebrated with just hours before slowly fade away into the howling wind.
Wow.
It was the psychological torture of basically waiting to lose your grip.
I want to leave you with a thought drawn directly from the memories of those who lived through it. What they remembered most wasn't the violent collision. It wasn't the horrific sound of the ship breaking apart. It was the black water, the endless freezing waves, which forces you to ask, what does it do to the human mind to survive a night where the hardest battle wasn't the collision itself, but the agonizing, lonely choice of continuing to hold on in the freezing pitch black when you know rescue might not arrive before your string finally runs out? We honor all those poor lost souls who boarded the Lady Elgin on her final voyage. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you on our next transportation tragedy.